With like the rates of like cancer rising in younger patients now, it just seems like more and more that age number that's been used forever, it just doesn't necessarily seem like the most accurate thing to use anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's like many things in healthcare. It's just a lot of people doing their best with very limited information and very limited evidence. Our breast cancer screening trials were like all in the 90s. And that was with technology that looks like it was the mammograms of those days, like nothing like the mammograms of today. And now we have this like fancy
Right.
tomosynthesis, super sensitive stuff that we didn't have back then. How we read, like everything has changed. What do we do? And like, it's really hard. It's not like there's an ongoing new trial all the time to make new evidence off of. And
Right.
I don't think that the current system of like people get in a room, look at a bunch of papers and say, here's the best thing today. And every paper looks at a different data, it's a different small thing. No one doing the actual full thing. Like we're never going to get something very personalized from that. At best, it's like a different one-size-fits-all guideline. I think our only way out would be to make it a technology. It's like always evolving and it's like a platform thing.
Hi, I'm Bisma, and you're listening to The Other C Word, a podcast about all things cancer from a stage 4 breast cancer warrior. We cover health and wellness, mind, body, and soul. Plan to leave each episode with hopefully some new insights and inspiration. Let's get into this week's episode. Hi, everyone. I want to give some background before we get into today's episode on how artificial intelligence is revolutionizing breast cancer screenings. There's a great article recently written on this in Wired magazine on how this all started at Massachusetts General Hospital, also known as MGH, during the pandemic. So, at the height of the pandemic, fewer women were coming in for their annual mammograms. This created an urgent need for better screening methods, and that's when Adam Yala, who is our guest today, and his team put their AI algorithm to the test. The algorithm they developed was able to flag women who were 3 times more likely to develop breast cancer within 5 years compared to current available methods of prediction. What I think is particularly impressive is that when they compared this AI to historical patient data, 42% of women who went on to develop breast cancer within 5 years were flagged as high risk by the algorithm, while the best existing model only flagged 23%. So this represents a huge step forward in how we can assess and manage breast cancer risk, potentially leading to earlier interventions and overall better outcomes. So in this episode, I'll be talking with Adam about how this AI-driven technology is reshaping breast cancer screenings, the challenges they're facing, and what the future holds for this groundbreaking work. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we have a truly fascinating episode for you. Joining us for the conversation is Adam Yala. Adam is an assistant professor at UC Berkeley and a leading researcher in the field of artificial intelligence, particularly focused on breast cancer screenings. Adam's work is pushing the boundaries of how we're using AI to detect and treat cancer earlier and more effectively. You might have seen Adam's work featured recently in Wired magazine, where they highlighted how AI is changing the landscape of breast cancer screenings. We're so excited to dig deeper into this topic with him today. Adam, welcome to the pod. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So AI, artificial intelligence, it's a term that's being thrown around a lot these days and definitely more and more in the healthcare space. But what I'm coming to learn is that when it comes to detecting and treating cancer, it's not just a buzzword that's being used. It's a real potential game changer. So Adam, to kick things off, could you tell us a little bit about your journey on how you got here and what led you to focus on AI in healthcare and specifically in breast cancer screenings?
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate education in computer science at MIT. And after a year studying abroad, I was feeling really existential about like, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? I felt like the engineering track I was on uh, didn't feel like it was pushing me enough. It didn't feel like right for the level of sacrifice it took for my family to immigrate here. So I reached out to a lot of faculty looking for research opportunities. And the things I was most intellectually interested about were opportunities in AI. And at the time, I was looking at language stuff, things more like what has later become like GPT code assistance type of stuff. And one of the faculty that got back to me was Regina Barzilay, who eventually became both my master's and my PhD advisor. When I joined her lab, I was originally working on a language project, but she actually was diagnosed with breast cancer about a year or so before I joined the group. And when she started tackling cancer as a scientist again, and after some of her oncologists reached out for help, there was an opportunity, and I volunteered to help lead some of the work there. And kind of this led to me leading a lot of the cancer work at her lab at MIT. In starting to look at healthcare as an algorithm problem, which is really easy when you're completely an outsider. Like I didn't go through some pre-med track. It was never truly the plan. I was on a computer science track, and then I started looking at healthcare as a computer science problem. it's kind of shocking how ancient many things are. Like some of the very first work I did when I was still more of a language focused person was just looking at information extraction. So let's say you just want to ask at a very famous hospital like MGH, how many people had this type of cancer in the last 5 years, who got which treatment, and what happened to them. This isn't like a breakthrough question, right? You just want to say like, what happened here in the last 5 years? No one can tell you that. They just can't. It's all free notes. It would take a huge amount of effort and labor to read all of that. It's just not in any way you can even structure that. And so when, coincidentally, the project I'm doing now, but the first project I did also then, is AI tools to help structure that information. So even the very simple questions are been hard to answer. If you look at the way we think about, like, what defines the way we get cancer diagnosed today, that is an algorithm. Like we have an algorithm that says you're 40, that's a classifier, and it predicts you should benefit from screening now. Well, that algorithm, like any other, is not perfect. Like for some people, it does too much. There's going to be a lot of harm. For many people, it's not nearly enough. And like, there's versions of this, like everything we experience today as outcomes of healthcare process is an algorithm, and we don't treat it like as such enough. And there's a lot of opportunities to improve upon it. So this kind of led to a huge deep dive of work. Originally, it's close collaborations at MGH, and like as I got into the space, I mean, it's just I truly believe that we can make a big difference, and I feel a big sense of responsibility. And there's just a lot of work to do. So it's an exciting time as always.
Yeah, that's amazing. So do you think that intersection of AI and healthcare, I'm sure it comes with its like unique set of challenges. Like what are some of those challenges that you've seen? Is it, does it come from like a data privacy issue, or does it come more from the technology aspect?
I think there's challenges the entire pipeline.
Yeah.
So to walk through some of that in stages, like there is a huge amount of data in cancer, like massive. This is not like breast cancer is not a rare disease. Like it's not like a super rare event in the country. You have to like chase the find the one case and 50,000 people. It's super common. But despite
Right.
that, the public data sets you find to work on this is like next to nothing. So if you're just
Correct.
interested in the problem, you want to do something about it and make it better, there's no really useful public resource to do that kind of thing. And if you work within a hospital system, I'm at both Berkeley and UCSF, and I'm very lucky to have strong collaborations within the UC system. You have some access, but that's a huge barrier of entry. And even that, like UCSF has a tiny fraction of the data available of A, the Bay Area, or B, the country. But it's not a local problem, it's a global problem. And so there's a
Right.
massive disparity in terms of what's possible, in terms of the data that's there and the richer you could build. You can imagine like GPT-4 level sophistication investments in billions of technologies are just not there. So once you have the data, which is hard for most people and very few people have and takes a lot of time to get to, the algorithms are
Right.
hard. Person's cancer screening journey, every image is humongous. You have many of them over time. The resolution is like 4,000 by 4,000 by 4, and then you have 10 years of screening, then you can see add biopsies and whatever. It gets super, super rich. And on the
Right.
AI
Right.
side, we're not good at modeling stuff that's like 10,000 times bigger than the inputs of your
Yeah.
biggest LLM. We're just not. And so that
Right.
requires like whole new tools of like how do you make algorithms that work at that giant scale, new kinds of neural networks, new kinds of learning algorithms so that you can actually use everything to better understand what's going to happen to people. Now, once
Got it.
you've resolved that problem, which is an ongoing area of exploration in my lab, there's still hard stuff to do. Like even figuring out what to do about it. Like if you know someone's a high risk, there's clear things that like, well, maybe I should get an MRI. Maybe I should do some preventative measure. Like there's clear ideas, but
Right.
proving stuff, like showing here's the harm benefit per intervention in healthcare is just a hard thing. Raising money for clinical trials
Yeah.
is hard. Running these things is hard. And by the time the trial is done, you have a new AI model. So even the way we do evidence generation is a little bit too slow. It's not designed for evolving products of today. It's designed for like frozen drugs. And the last
Yeah.
bit, even once you have all of that, regulatory and financial models make it sustainable, also hard. Everything is hard.
Yeah. So, okay. So for those people who are not familiar, like, can you explain how the current process is? So I believe there's like 4 images or 4 views for a mammogram.
Yeah.
Like how is AI taking that data and using it for AI purposes?
Yeah. So first, actually, let me start off with the problem and then why the images are
Okay.
actually useful for that problem in the first place and how we use AI to then solve that problem with those images and how that works. So
Perfect.
problem we're trying to solve is we want to reduce the absolute rates of advanced cancer happening in the population, right? So if we want to do that, we need to figure out before the image is taken, who should get an image and when, right? Because if you orally
Mm.
show for the image at this point, time has happened. Either you have it or you don't. So we need to
Right.
preempt that event. To do that preemption, you need foresight. You need to understand who is likely to get disease and when, so you can do something about it to preempt that bad event from happening. So that problem is called predicting cancer risk. And if you're familiar with the
Okay.
area, you might think like, okay, we know age matters, we know family history matters, we know these kind of rough things. When
Right.
you really look into the details, they're not fantastic predictors. They're like better
Mm.
than random, but not by like a huge margin. But that's all the clinical guidelines we have today. We know imaging matters. Like people might be familiar with breast density. There's national reporting guidelines about breast density. It makes cancer harder to catch, increases someone's risk.
Yeah.
Even breast density folded into the best clinical calculators you have today aren't that accurate. They just don't give you that much sophistication. And so even with all of that, it's really hard to say who should get screened sooner or later with what modality to do something about it. So that's where AI
Right.
comes in. Instead of saying, we know this thing is called breast density that someone eyeballed back in the 60s, we're going to try to like learn what's actually predictive of that future event. So to do that, okay, we're going to look at data in the past, because people getting diagnosed all the time. What was their imaging? Because it's there. What happened 4 or 5 years later, or whenever it did happen? What was the kind
Right.
of stage of that cancer? Let's predict what's the pattern. If humans were perfect, we would have recovered breast density as the measure. But humans are not. We always
Right.
have room to improve. We can only handle so much. And so what we've shown is that by learning that pattern automatically as an AI problem, you can do much, much better than the clinical calculators that are using practice today. And there's room to do
Okay.
better than what we've done so far. So right now, like the basic setup is like you have the standard pixels per person in a mammogram. You have the outcome because it's all data in hindsight. Learn that pattern, but that box, the linkage can be better because we expect that of our AI systems year over year. But even
Right.
that, you actually have mammograms over time. You have mammograms and tomo. You have MR over time, and we're not even tapping all that's possible.
Yeah. So what about, so I guess this is looking at people who have gotten mammograms, which traditionally is like age starting at 40 and then once a
Yeah.
year. What about like do you have any data on younger patients that are getting it?
This is something I'm so deeply interested in. The data is harder to come by, and it's something we're working on. So there's a student visiting my lab now in collaboration with faculty in Denmark, in Mads Nielsen, who's so students coming in Denmark. They have a really nice national health system that has data across everything. So to step back, I think the way we predict is not off imaging. Obviously, imaging's not there yet. You want to predict it
Yeah.
using everything you do have. And what do you have? Well, you have health events over the lifetime through the medical record. In the context of Denmark and national health systems, you don't just have family history, you have the health events of your family in a very detailed
Right.
way. You have the health
Right.
events of your neighborhood. So you can kind of get a sense of like environmental exposures, what's happening in your community. And there what we're trying to do is how do you take all of that to understand who is a high enough cancer risk for them for a mammogram to be worthwhile. And it's not just a breast cancer problem. I mean, like in pancreatic cancer, we don't have any screening because it's all too rare. So we just don't know how to allocate. It's not that early detection can't help, which our
Right.
tools aren't good enough to even make it possible. So both
Got it.
early age breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, non-smoking lung cancer, all have the same type of problem. We don't know enough to not give it to just everyone and then just cause a lot of unneeded biopsies and stuff. So it's like we're like, how do we know
Yeah.
who's actually going to benefit enough to say, actually, this is a good idea for you? That's a predictive problem. And I think we should do a kitchen sink approach. Let's try everything we have to resolve that to make early detection possible for this population.
Right.
The US is not really well set up for it because we're like so fragmented. Getting data in one hospital is hard. People don't stay in one place very long, so it's hard to get this like longitudinal section. So we're
Right.
starting with data sets in Denmark because if it works there, at least we know it's possible. And if it's
Right.
possible, we can try to make it work here.
Try to
Maybe, and
transfer
we'll
it.
see how things go. But like, it's something that I really want to do. It's just it's harder, but something we
Yeah.
have to do.
Okay. What about Denmark specifically made you, want to start it there?
They simply have organized national health data. So even if I want to
Got it.
know what happened to me across my lifetime in the US, I have no idea every health record that's happened. I just have no idea. Let alone like we very fragmented. There's some places in the US that could do some of this, like a Kaiser has a lot of longitudinal data. But in many places where people are just moving, switching health systems, their economic
Hmm.
records don't talk to each other. Getting your health record over decades is really hard. And getting
Yeah.
health records of your family and linking that all in and all in one coherent place to this kind of work is just also really hard. And some
Yeah.
places, basically, like if it doesn't work in Denmark and the bit of capacity there's really low, then we know the approach isn't good enough. Maybe invest in like other type of modalities, like more blood stuff or whatever. But if it works there, then we know like regular care is enough. So it's
Got it.
conceptually easiest to test there because there the data is just clean, whereas our data is like chaos.
Yeah. And it seems like a lot of our data is really based on like the amount of information that the patient themselves has about their
Yeah,
family. So it's like if I don't know much about my family history or my ancestors, like I won't be able to tell a doctor, and then that may not flag me for like an early screening. So it's really
exactly.
kind of it feels like it's dependent on me as a patient.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like confounders in the American health system because how much data you generate depends on like what's your insurance policy? Do you have insurance? Like what's your access to care? And
Right.
that could make it, if we tried it with technology today, just here first, you could think it doesn't work, even though it can work. It's just the current health graph thing that you're dealing with is a little too complicated. So it's easier
Yeah.
to kind of like prove the concept somewhere kind of simple, where things are kind of organized, and
Yeah.
then go from there to a larger setting. But maybe we'll evolve that approach. It just basically, that's the collaboration partnership that we have today. And so we're going to try it. We're going to do our best. And if that doesn't work, then we'll find another way.
Okay. Got it. So currently the way like I think there's always like a lot of conversations about like when you think of AI, you think of like job displacements. Like do you view this algorithm that you're developing as something that could eventually replace a radiologist or oncologist, or do you view it working like simultaneously with them? Like how do you view that interaction?
Yeah, at its best, it should change the nature of their job. So there's a lot of
Mhm.
impossible questions we ask oncologists and radiologists today. Like, you tell them, okay, like, what should this person get next? They haven't. I mean, like, they look at the guideline, and the guideline's a bunch of people getting together, looking at the best available evidence, and saying, well, we think it's this, but maybe there's no trial specifically for this particular question. It's really
Right.
hard. There's no information there. So what AI can do, it can create the information so that we can have foresights and like informed decision. What's actually best? Is it an MRI or is it not? People just can't do that
Yeah.
now. In really tricky treatment situations, like we wish we knew who's going to respond to therapy. We look at
Right.
a trial, you're not the trial. That's just an average across the population, you know?
Right.
We take our best thing. If we can give you rigorous evidence that says for this person, this is actually better, they can use that information and make a way better informed decisions and discuss that with their patients. Like, so I think
Right.
it's the complementary thing. Now, some things will change. Like if some detection things are good enough, maybe do partial automation. So the nature of the job will change, but that's any job forever. They should all change over time.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we plateaued. Uh, but I don't think I wouldn't make the kind of claim like stop training profession X
Yeah.
or something. That'd be
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah. It's not a replacement. It's more like changing the way that they do their work.
Yeah. And to do
Yeah.
that, it had to be so useful. Like, I mean, they wanted to help patients, right? Like, if the thing is good and it's genuinely helpful, then
Yeah. Then they'll
things
want to
align.
use it. Okay. So in the US, like there's obviously like HIPAA, right? So like a lot of this patient data,
Yeah.
as you're saying, isn't something that's like readily available. You can't just go to a database and access this data. So how do you view that changing, or how do you view, patients being able to opt in to things like this and being able to say like, hey, take my data and you have access to it to use for your machine learning?
Yeah. It is a large challenge, and there's some really cool initiatives happening to try to overcome that. So there's like this initiative by the NIH called All of Us, where they're trying to help
Okay.
people opt into data collection in a prospective way to collect really broad information in order to build nice national database into the future. They're trying to recruit, I think it was like 1 million patients total or something, which is still a drop in the bucket in the scheme of things, but it's way better than what we have. Uh, while I really admire those resources, I know they're not solving any of my problems today, right? Because in reality, I need numbers, and like any given year in any one place, the numbers are quite small. It's the data over time that gets you to those numbers. And so my approach has been really tackling like, well, how do I build partnerships in these places? How to get all the right ethical approvals to make it happen with the system that's there. Now,
Yeah.
there can always be a better system. As relatively new faculty, like I'm starting year 3, I don't feel very empowered to change the whole system. That's a have enough bold
It's like
cancer things to try to
entertaining.
do. The political change of how we think about health data governance is like a little bit above my pay grade. But we can definitely do better there. Within that system, it takes a lot of coalition building because people are aligned and really, but it's always hard. Like maneuvering inside any one organization to make a data sharing agreement takes non-trivial
Yeah.
effort. It takes a lot of like stakeholder alignment, and convincing people it's worth their effort and that we can really build something useful if we come together for it is just the regular work of making science possible. I wish it was
Yeah.
easier. I wish it took less friction, but I don't have that kind of power. So, it is what it is.
Yeah. So is there anything like me as in a patient or like someone listening in as a patient, like is there anything that we can currently do to say like we want to opt in to make our data available, or is that not something that currently exists?
I know there are initiatives like All of Us that are trying to prospective recruit patients, but really it takes to a broader thing, participating in types of trials that are locally available to say trying the AI tools that can improve something about your screening or kind of consenting to try out these studies to help generate the evidence is one of the key mechanisms because
Okay.
in the whole pipeline, everything is hard, right? Like from getting the data to building it to even proving that it works. And so any part of that that's like locally convenient, either participating in a study or simply indicating to physicians or community buy-in that we want something to be there or used is helpful because it helps shift the entire window of possibilities. I don't have a
Yeah.
clear ready-made, this link, this website is going to change the world tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's a little more diffuse than that, but generally participating in studies is always super, super valuable.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, let's maybe go back a little bit. I want to talk about currently like a radiologist or oncologist will, look at a mammogram and say like you either have cancer or you don't have cancer. Do they tell you like you're at a higher risk for cancer, or do they not? Is that not something that currently is told to patients?
Yeah, it depends on place to place. Many places will run a traditional risk calculator that will like look at, they will take your questionnaire that has like age, family history, maybe age as menarche or whatever. They'll take your
Yeah.
breast density. So the radiologist will look at that and assess it. They will put it into a calculator. It's going to give them some number of like 5-year risk or lifetime risk.
Is
And then
this the
they're going
Anka
to,
score?
not OncoScore. There's like the TAR-Cusick, there's the Gale model, there's a BCSE. There's like
Okay.
many of them. They're all kind of the same. They're not exactly the same, but
Okay.
they're kind of the same. Uh, all of them will predict either 5-year lifetime risk. Then there's guidelines at the national level, many of them conflicting that don't agree with each other. So it's all chaos. You're going to pick whatever one and say, like, off of these guidelines, maybe a 20% lifetime risk, you're eligible for MRI, and insurer buys into that. The issue with that is that there's no study whatsoever. Like the 20% number was kind of like drawn out of a hat. The actual guidelines said
Mhm.
22, 25. Like, what does that even mean? Nobody knows. They couldn't really, there's no evidence to say, like, there was a trial, this guideline has this benefits for these people. Even that kind of evidence is, while really powerful, is not even fully what you want. You want to say, for you, what's it going to do for me? That doesn't
Right.
exist. Even the course medicine version of averages doesn't exist.
Right.
And so there's not everybody buys into it. So the adoption of it is mixed. So some places with some risk score, accuracy is very middling. The guidelines around it don't have great evidence around them yet. But like it's kind of working with imperfect Lego pieces, trying to do our best. And different places view the evidence a bit differently to try to figure out what to do.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. And so your technology, like, can you give us an example of like, okay, so like what is something that it's able to do that like the current method of
Yeah.
doing it is not doing?
Yeah. So the thing we're trying to do is the same as that statistical risk calculator, we just do it better. So it's
Okay.
trying to tell you like who's likely to get cancer within this amount of time. That is a measurable thing, right? Because you can just look at what happened in the time, who was right. And we've done
Right.
this now across, in the original papers, there's like 7 hospitals across 5 countries. Since then, there's been a lot more testing. So now it's 43 hospitals across 14 countries. But in the analysis that we've done, the accuracy of these models is way better than was possible before. Now we're in the
Okay.
phase of running multi-site clinical trials to establish like how much better does that make care if you take this other kind of risk threshold to then say who gets MR, how does that change outcomes? That takes a while though. We're still fundraising to run a big enough trial, pulling together the things. So expect in a couple of years to say, here's how much better this new AI powered guideline is than the traditional guideline. It's a little tricky because the traditional
Got it.
guideline never had a trial around it in the first place. So you need to basically prove the
Right.
baseline and the new thing at the same time, whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, but in the future, thing we're trying to get to is going away even beyond risk assessment. Is just for this intervention, what's the benefit to you? What's the risk?
Right.
That way, if you have that kind of foresight and you know the error bars, you're like, okay, cool. Well, I can make an informed decision. Like, how do you weigh this stuff?
Yeah. Do you see this expanding into like people that are already diagnosed with breast cancer? Like, do you think that, like yes, you've already been diagnosed, but like, how will you perform with the treatments? Do you think like this type of work can expand into saying like you are more likely to benefit from this treatment versus someone
Yeah.
else?
Yeah. It's totally the same type of problem. So it's actually another ongoing thing that we're working on. I have a great colleague who's visiting from Sweden, Fredrik Strand, who are starting a project on this in collaboration with a couple other folks, the new PhD students on this. We're looking at MRIs and trying to predict response in the adjuvant to pre-surgery therapy to say what's the best option. In the context of other cancers, GI cancers, we have a big project proposal coming together that's trying to look at across a wide range of GI cancers, like liver cancer, pancreatic cancer, which treatments is likely to respond, how can we give them this more information. It's the same type of problem. It's like data's too rich,
Yeah.
people can't juggle a trillion things in their head, so how can AI help? It's the same kind of
Right.
challenges, but I think we'll get there.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. So just to give you a little bit of background. So when I got diagnosed, um, I was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic cancer. I was 35 years old and um basically I was pregnant. And so there was a small lump, less than 2 centimeters in one of my breasts. And when I went to the ER saying, I've immense back pain, they were like, you're pregnant. We can't do a scan. So they kind of just dismissed me. And it wasn't until I pushed for a scan that they did a CT on my spine and said, you have metastases all over your spine. Then, did full body scans and found this lump. And it kind of just seemed strange in the sense like everyone was like, oh, that's really like alarming. We don't see, stage 4 present itself initially, de novo. And it was just and then I think when I got diagnosed, they said, you have a 5-year, the median survival rate is 5 years. And so I said, I'd love to see like the data set, like what age are these patients? What treatments were they on? And every question I was asking related to that, I just wasn't getting any answers to. They just said, that's the data that we have. It's actually from like a 2016 study. And, the treatments available now are very different than they were in 2016 for hormone positive breast cancer.
Yeah.
And so it was really confusing because, that's the data that's the number you're given, but there wasn't any, underlying information on like, where do I stand in this data set? And I think also that's, one thing that's been troublesome is like, I've been on a few lines of treatment. And whenever I ask, like, how do we think I'll do? It's like, well, we don't really know. Like, some people perform really well on this and some people don't. And I always ask, like, what indicators are there that someone's going to do well versus not do well? And there's never an answer. And so I think that's something to what you're talking about is like, if we can get more into that data and say like these are the types of people who are doing well on this, these are the ones that aren't, these are their factors, like as a patient that would be something that would just be a lot more helpful to know and just kind of know like where you stand and then if that's the right treatment for you or if there's a better option for you to get.
Yeah, I mean, it is really the universal problem. Like, we ask oncologists and patients to make impossible decisions. It's like, there's no data specifically about someone just like you. There just isn't. So we don't know. We just don't know. There's a lot we don't know. There's a
Yeah.
lot of just informed guessing and like anecdotal. Well, I saw a patient like this, so maybe I have an intuition that maybe this will be good in the setting, but like you don't know. You couldn't publish that
Right.
type of anecdote. Uh,
Right.
and the only way we can do better is by trying to build AI stuff to fix it, right? Because like
Right.
I don't think anyone's ever going to be to eyeball. There's new drugs all the time, and no one's
Yeah.
quite the same. They have like the thing we continue learning is that it's always more complex than we thought. We think it's tumor size, like oh, this whole like microenvironment stuff is happening around the tumor. There's tumor infiltrated lymphocyte. There's always new stuff being discovered, and so we
Right.
need mechanisms to kind of automatically scrape all that's there to give the best information, so that it's not like that we haven't tried. Is that like it's not captured in the data that's there at all. And this is the inherent uncertainty of where we are.
Right.
In general, progress in the treatment space has been slower and harder than general screening space because the data is even smaller. So whereas in
Hmm.
screening, your denominator is everyone, and then every cancer counts kind of as a weird prediction problem. In treatment, your denominator shrinks, right? It's people who are getting treated with this. And so data sharing across many places is even more important because like you really don't have enough at any one health center. You need many people to come together. And it really exacerbates the complications of doing this kind of research.
Yeah.
But it's like hard does not make it any, doesn't mean don't do it. It's going to take
Yeah.
longer. But so
It'll just
there's
take
always been a
longer.
lot of urgency. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So what about, so we talked about data privacy a little bit. What about things like looking at, diverse population sets? So like underserved populations or different ethnic groups. Like, is there, eventually, is there a plan to, have data sets that are inclusive and more descriptive of like the overall population?
Yeah. So I think it's really important to kind of like separate out how we build the models and how we evaluate them. Because how we evaluate them is by far the most important thing. Because in the end, if you have this thing that works great across all these different diverse populations all across the world, if however you built it, I don't really care anymore. I care that it works, and I care about like how can we actually make it useful to people. Because the way we build things is always evolving. The way we evaluate things is kind of like it's just you can just say that today and it's going to apply for 20 years into the future. So I think it's really important we have the right kind of testing settings. As a country, we don't really do a good job of making that easy. So as part of like my early breast cancer work, I spent a lot of time, and I was very lucky to find a lot of collaborators that are willing to like partner with us to do this kind of external validation work. But it's not easy. It took a huge amount of time, a lot of cold email to find people willing to share with us, just run the model and see how well it works. Uh, Now that we've done this, we have a bunch of existing relationships, and we can continue to build those partnerships and do more validations. But it's not any easier for the next person to do it. It's not like the best thing for the community. It's just something that we found to work for us. And so if we had something like a national testing network that's maybe tied to regulatory approvals, it would be super valuable for the country to have. And I think the evaluation problem is way easier to solve for sharing than the training problem. As soon as you get into training, people start complaining about like, well, who owns it and IP and blah, blah, blah. And you get all this kind of
Right.
stuff. We don't need to solve that to get the rigor that we actually need. So for every paper
Right.
that we've done in the space, like both in breast and in lung and all the future plans, we always have a bunch of hospitals involved, both in the US and usually outside of the US, to make sure that things actually work. Because if any one hospital, it could be a fluke. It could be some weird bias in the data. Maybe you collected it wrong. You just don't know. It's only when you get outside of it do you actually know for real does this stuff actually work. And I personally don't believe almost anything I read without seeing external validation.
Yeah, absolutely. So this particular algorithm that you're working on is for breast cancer, but you're saying it is transferable to other types of cancers. Which other cancers have you guys looked into?
Yeah, so it's really like a family of algorithms. There's like a lot of stuff going on in parallel. Then there's work in treatment planning, also in breast. Then we're also working in lung cancer. Similar questions with a colleague, Jay Ho Song, looking at both can we improve the diagnosis system above the current radiology criteria and how do we personalize screening? It's another type of question. In pancreatic cancer, we're working both on who's going to get it from the EHR side, that's the Denmark project. Once you have screening, that's with a really cool consortium called Proceed. And then once you have the diagnosis, how do you actually figure out which frontline therapy for late stage disease do you start? Is it fulfirinox, gemcitabine? People don't know. And so, like, across the whole gamut, we have that work. In prostate cancer, right now it's more focused on screening. And then we're also working in MDS, which is a blood cancer. So that's the current
Okay.
gamut, and I might even be forgetting one. There's a lot of work to do, but the technology is very related. So the kind of
Okay.
algorithm innovation to say I can now handle 10 scans at a time, it's not like designed to mammogram specifically. It's a general like how do you
Right.
make the network way bigger. So that
Yeah,
same thing helps the treatment problem in pancreas, which also helps the prostate problem. So it's really like
that's
a
great.
technology platform that's pretty coherent with one team. But the to know that things works, it can be efficient to like jump between breast and lung and prostate. Because maybe it's easier to make it work here first, and that teaches you something about the other one. You kind of bounce around.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's probably like a really hard question to answer, but what does timeline look like for this? Like how, when do you think like this could become something that is widely used?
You predicted it correctly. That's a hard question because I've
Yeah.
learned a couple things. Uh, no matter what the timeline is, I will feel unhappy that it was too slow. That is a statement of personality, not a statement of any particular timeline. And whatever I think it is, I'm probably underestimating it. So to give you the lower bound of timelines, like the issue we're facing is that changing healthcare is not an established process. It's not like there's like a guideline of like you have a new model, here's how it's supposed to get plugged in, do these steps, things happen. There's none of that. So we built a model and we show that it works across these international validation studies back in the international validation papers, maybe 2021, October. It took a couple years to raise money in order to start the first clinical trial. We expand the clinical trial. There's not going to be that result for at least another 2 years. Now we're looking like that timeline is crazy to me. And then after that, you still need to go through like regulatory stuff, right? Like crazy.
I mean,
I'm hoping
the whole
that
the FDA process is like another several years, to say the least,
several
right?
years. And
Yeah.
I think long term, I want to get to a point in which from technology being ready to it helping people is something like
Yes.
2.5 years. We're not there
Wow.
yet, partially because we have a lot to learn to make that possible. Because right now, like this is our first full end-to-end rodeo, right? Like, so like, it's not like we knew the path. We didn't have all the relationships. We're very new to the trial world. We'll probably get much better at running them than we are now. There's a lot of us to learn to do this process better. But steady state, if we're always running trials, so we have a way to kind of the trial is ready with an old model before the new model comes in, then we can take away a lot of that gap of how to even start the thing. That should bring it down from like that 2-year gap down to 0. We're working on new things to make the trials adaptive, so they expect a new model to come in. If we do that, then the trials should get faster and faster. Once we start getting things regulatory approved, I hope to also make that faster because the hardest part is the first one. So I think like for the first model that's actually helpful to seeing it help more patients, I'm scared to even say what that number is. It depends how quickly we learn. But I'm hopeful that as we learn, we're going to bring this down to move faster and faster because like, the standard 10, 15 year thing per thing is like, I don't want my career to be like, we've helped on 2 things. Like the idea of that is like, I can't handle it.
Yeah.
We have to do better.
Okay, got it. That makes a lot of sense. Are there any countries that you know of that are already, way ahead of the US and how they're, predicting and managing cancer?
Not really. I mean, the adoption's different. So in Europe, like the reading system is very different. They actually have 2 radiologists read every mammogram. And
Okay.
because they have 2 radiologists read every mammogram, they read it quite differently, like the recall rate quite a bit lower. They're screened every 2 years, and generally not every one. So the whole system is
Okay.
quite different. And there's a
Okay.
lot of interest and like really rigorous trials showing that you could swap one of the readers with an AI model and still get the same thing or do better. But there you're going from 2 people to 1 plus AI, and here we just have 1 person. So I think like some of the advances they're making in their system are not really translatable to us just because our system is so different and we don't design it the same way. We don't have the same kind of structures. I
Yeah.
don't know of any place that's doing truly a better job at saying like our absolute rate of advanced cancer is going to be so much lower because you're doing all this fancy stuff.
Yeah.
Like I don't know of a place that does that. And
Okay.
it might be that as technology gets mature, we prove it. Some places might adopt it faster because they're simply more like homogenized and stuff.
Right.
So who knows who's going to like help their country first. But as of now, I don't think there's a clear leader, clear lagger.
Okay. But yeah, because you hear a lot about like, other countries are making huge advancements. And I always wonder, like, is that really the case? Or is that really just, kind of just like, people just like talking about, one country doing better than the other. But I was just curious about that.
Yeah, I can't say like I mean there's like I can say there's specific studies that are really cool that have happened in Europe. But like there's a couple of recent really pivotal studies in breast cancer screening about like there's a dense trial that happened to show that like you can reduce interval cancer by a lot by offering women very dense breast MRI. There's a trial by my colleague Frederick who did this similarly in Sweden but with an AI model instead, showing that's way better than the density model. But interval cancers don't mean the same thing in Europe and in here because there you have every 2 years and you're recalling very few people per screen, whereas there you have every year and you're calling way more people. So our false positive rate is way higher. So like, will
Right.
that translate here? Not super clear. And it's not like we know that now, like, we don't have the evidence yet that this is like transformed the landscape of the stages of cancer that you see in practice.
So do you think so in the US right now, like the current starting age for mammograms for most people is 40. Do you think
Mhm.
like with like this hopefully refined data that we can get to a more specific age that makes sense? It seems like the age of 40 has been around for the longest time.
Yeah, I'm hoping that like what we think of now as public health, it no longer becomes an age. Like you sign in to your like health provider thing and it says of everything we know for you, mammogram next year would have these benefits and things. And it's it's recommended for you because it's not because of your age, it's because of everything we know about you. And
Yeah.
for some people that might not even happen until they're 55 because they're so low
Right.
risk. And for some people, it happen at 25. And it depends on where exactly they are. And like, instead of, because age has always been just a proxy for risk. It's just not a really good risk model.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Like, I
absolutely.
mean,
I
it's just
mean,
not.
with like the rates of like cancer rising in younger patients now, it just seems like more and more that like that age number that's been used for, decades and forever, it just doesn't necessarily seem like the most accurate thing to use anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it's like many things in healthcare, just throw people doing their best with very limited information and very limited evidence.
Yeah.
Like our breast cancer screening trials were like all in the 90s. And that was with technology that looks like, it was the mammograms of those days, look nothing like the mammograms of today. And now we have this like fancy
Right.
tomosynthesis, super sensitive stuff that we didn't have back then. The drugs of
Yeah.
today are nothing like the drugs of then.
Right.
How we read, like everything has changed. Cancer incidence is changing, and people are like, what do we do? And like, it's really hard. It's not like there's an ongoing new trial all the time to make new evidence off of. And I
Right.
don't think that the current system of like people get in a room, look at a bunch of papers and say, here's the best thing today. And every paper looks at a different data, it's a different small thing. No one doing the actual full thing. Like, we're never going to get something very personalized from that. At best,
Right.
it's like a
Right.
different one size fits all guideline. I think
Yeah.
our only way out is it's not a thing someone looks at a paper and says, like, the number is 38. Like that's not going
Yeah.
to solve it either. It'd be to make it a technology. It's like always evolving and it's like a platform thing.
Yeah. And that always has like data being fed in and being refined and looked at again and again. It's
Yeah,
not
it's
just
getting
like we
better
do it
year
one
over
time.
year. It's always
Yeah.
running its own trials. It's sustainable in a way, so it funds itself in some kind of way that makes sense.
Yeah.
And we can expect it the same way that we expect our ad recommendations to get better next year and be marginally less annoying and maybe more targeted. We expect
Yeah.
this thing to be marginally better next year, and like we just don't
Yeah.
have that now. And I think building that, showing that's even feasible, would be a landmark thing in the first place. But making that sustainable and just part of what we expect care to be, it's like a dream. I think it's one you should fight
Yeah.
for.
That's awesome. So you're tied in with UCSF, Berkeley. Are there any other institutions that you're directly working with, or is it through um, like collaborations, affiliations?
So my position. I'm part of a new department that's jointly between Berkeley and UCSF called Computational Position. It's kind of designed to foster this kind of work, and that's why
Mhm.
it's both Berkeley with all the fantastic computational folks and community, and at UCSF I have all my really great clinical collaborators. So that's where I work. That's my job, and that's where my office is, etc. And I like commute between both campuses, though I prefer trees, and so I'm usually in Berkeley
In
physically or
Berkeley. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I'm not a fan of the bridge. The bridge is not my
Yes.
favorite place, and I would spend a lot of time on the
Yeah.
bridge. I do have a lot of really great collaborations with other folks across the country and internationally because these problems are too hard for any one place to do alone. And anything we built just at UCSF, how do we know it really works? Well, I only believe it works if it also works in many other institutions. So we've been really lucky to have great collaborators at Emory, in
Mhm.
Atlanta, and UCSD, UC Davis, if we need Dash agreement, which I'm super excited about to move forward with the work in MRI. We're really great collaborators in Taiwan, Chiang Memorial Hospital. There's like so many places that have been, I feel very fortunate to have their trust in us to bother doing the super hard work to let us validate
Right.
with them to move the field forward.
That's great. What about like institutions like MD Anderson or Sloan Kettering? Like, do you know if they're doing their own set of this type of work?
So I don't know MD Anderson very well, just because everyone has their own weird silo trajectory through life. I have one collaborator there. We're starting some new work. I
Hmm.
I can say for my particular type of research, like in the way that we're approaching it, but maybe everybody feels this way. I feel that we're relatively unique in the way we're tackling it, and we really have a unique role to play in building this kind of large scale deep learning type of work to bear in cancer. And there's a lot of work
Mm.
across the community that's a lot more what we call radiomics focused, where you're getting to like segments the lesion and like take out things that we know, which works in really small data set sizes and fits many people's core expertise, but isn't really like it isn't what I think is the most ambitious formulation. Like I want,
Mhm.
in the same way that we invest a shit ton into our chatbots, I want the same type of like better raw horsepower, maximally flexible, the best that we can possibly imagine type of approach to become feasible in what we do in cancer. And so that's the way that I tackle things. And I think in that side, I I mean I don't know everybody. There might be other folks in MD Anderson that are doing work that's deeply aligned. In the particular areas I'm working in right now, I don't know other folks in that institution.
Okay.
I'm also not
Okay.
familiar with all the ongoing work at MSK, though I'm sure they're doing lots of great stuff.
I guess I'm curious. So, like, I mean, this seems like a huge undertaking that you've taken on. As far as like, where do you see like the future of like AI in medicine? Do you think this is just something that like going forward, it's going to go hand in hand, and that more and more institutions are going to adopt using AI and doing their own trials? And do you think this is just something that's over time just going to be, a part of like the normal course for most institutions?
I think so. I mean, if we succeed, what it means for me to succeed is like we've proven that this truly works. And if you do these things and you use these algorithms, your health advance will get better. And I have faith that like if we make the pieces work correctly, we don't do something crazy like I don't even have an example of something crazy. Then like people will want to adopt that because the issue, like I think the bottleneck really is not like will, it's results. There's many
Right.
like promising things, but most trials fail. So like hesitance makes sense. Like you don't want to be taking something random that you want to actually
Yeah.
prove that it works. Improving anything is really hard. Like medicine's really complex, and convincing people
Yeah.
who are very busy to like try something different is tricky. But once you prove it, the conversation totally changes. Like everybody's looking for the thing that works. So I really view it's
Yeah.
like it's a race to like how do we get to the point where we can generate this evidence quickly. And I think once we have that, and if we prove that enough times, it becomes a part of the regular infrastructure.
Yeah, that's great. Do you think, as far as like obstacles, like, do you think it's time that's the biggest obstacle? Do you think it's funding? Do you think it's like people buying into this? Like, what do you think is like one of the biggest obstacles for this?
So I can only really speak for that in the context of my group, right? Because like I think the community answer is probably more like data as a community. That's kind
Mhm.
of the problem. For us, that's not quite the same because we've worked so long in pulling together data collaborations. So really, I feel the bottlenecks now are just time and money. That's always what it is. I spend a lot of time writing grants because that supports students to build stuff. It supports the GPU needs and all the compute to make that work. And I really feel just a matter of it's a matter of time until we build the stuff. How long it takes, truly, you never know. You kind of know what zone you're in. It doesn't feel close. Does it feel far away? But like if it's close, it could be next. Like it could be next week that the experiment works, or it could be 2 months from now. You just can't tell because anything could be the day. And I also
Right.
tell my students like today's gonna be the day, and then next year doesn't work. Like
Yeah.
today could be the day. And
Yeah.
so it takes a lot of like the time is always uncertain. All that we know for sure is that like as long as we continue having high quality shots on goal, we'll continue pushing. It's a matter of time. So it's a matter like
Right.
more money will speed things up, get more servers, things just run faster. There's always room to
Yeah.
improve there. So I spend a lot of our time fundraising to try to make this stuff possible. But it's a matter of time. It's just a matter of keep pushing.
Yeah. That's great. Do you guys have it? Are you guys working on any sort of like, have you guys reached out to like OpenAI or any of these like big players to see like, do they want to get into the healthcare space? Is this something like they're looking to do?
I've heard that they're looking into getting into stuff. They have a lot of hospitals are adopting GPT-4. That they have their own visions and agendas of how they want to build stuff. They're trying to drive adoption. As far as I understand, they're trying to drive adoption of their internal tools. Maybe they can create some great
Yeah.
value there. Uh, I don't know them all that well to say like they would be great research partners. Uh,
Right.
and I think there's not a place in which at least I've had luck saying like, okay, this industry collaborator would provide great helpful resources because usually there's a lot of strings attached and makes institutional lines very things get complicated. So I don't have great faith uh, that some company with a lot of money will swoop in and save us. It's
Yeah. And they may
so
not be the right partner for you.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Okay, so Adam, maybe to wrap up, is there any like one key message or something to our listeners to take away from today's conversation, or just like maybe to someone who's like kind of like skeptical on AI and its usage? Like, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think what I would say is that what we have in care today is an algorithm. It's an algorithm we haven't fully evaluated. We don't rigorously check its performance. It doesn't work perfectly, and we need to be ambitious that we can make it better. AI is the tools we're using today as our best path to make the actual allocation of care better. And I'm sure in 5 years from now we'll get branded something different. But there is no reason to believe that of all the information that we have, we can't do better with that information. All AI
Right.
is a technology of learning how to make decisions from data, how to measure predictions, like find the patterns. And
Right.
to believe that we can't do better is to say we've peaked. And I'm positionally enabled to believe that. We can do better,
Yeah,
and we
and
should
it's
continue
like
pushing for that.
the current method is also quote unquote AI. It just maybe wasn't labeled that, but like this has been in place for a long time, and we're now looking to a way for, to refine it and make it a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, I think like this is true in almost every problem in clinical care. Like, there's no other sector when we think we've peaked. That like this can't get better. Screening today is screening forever. We can't expect the
Yeah.
detection rate to get better. We can't expect the stage like, and I don't think it's. I think it's actually the natural thing to expect it to get better. And like we think, well, how would that be? Well, you're getting foresight. What's the language of getting predictions today? It's AI. It feels like a very natural. Maybe because I'm so deep in the weeds, it feels like it's so deeply ingrained in the natural. But I think it's true.
Awesome. Well, Adam, thank you so much for being here. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and like all this innovative work that you're doing to fight, not just breast cancer, but other types of cancer as well.